So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about Azure networking. And I know we have a mixed audience where not everybody is fully conversant with Azure. I know we may have MVPs and ex-MVPs that are MVPs in other areas, but we'll try to cover this in enough detail. Okay. Oops, come on, forward. Next slide. There we go. First of all, a little bit about my company. I work for Stratum Technology. I'm based in Nashville, Tennessee, and we've been working with Azure and Amazon Web Services, although more with Azure, since about 2008. For those of you who know Azure and the history of Azure, you know that it was just announced in 2008 and did not actually come out until 2010. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We specialize in migrating people into Azure. So that we take a lot of people that have data center, have equipment in their data centers. They want to move to the cloud, so we help them do that. And we even have an automated process that we use to move them to the cloud. The second line in that slide is kind of interesting. We specialize in network architecture and re-architecture. And the reason we emphasize re-architecture is it is very easy to get an Azure subscription, create virtual machines in Azure, and just start playing around. But if you don't do it carefully and you don't do it with a plan, you can actually paint yourself into a corner. All right, so we help a lot of companies basically paint themselves out of that corner. And of course, we also do a lot of work with disaster recovery using tools like Azure Site Recovery, which is not only a disaster recovery tool, but it's also a migration tool. Okay, again, there's a lot of information about us here. We also run a network, a managed services business where we manage infrastructure for our clients, mostly cloud infrastructure. A little bit about me. I always tell people I've been an Azure specialist since before it was called Azure. I was working at Microsoft when I discovered it in 2007 as an internal project. And I was actually a principal architect evangelist with Microsoft for about 6 years. I'm kind of proud of the fact that when Azure was launched in 2010, I was one of about 30 Azure specialists that Microsoft had worldwide and all their thousands of people. So it was kind of a kick. So after that, I left Microsoft and immediately was hired back by Microsoft as a consultant working for the Microsoft Azure product team. Then I spent 3 years helping customers adopt Azure, troubleshooting issues and helping people adopt it. So I have a checkered career. I've actually been a developer. I've been a data center manager. I've worked in a lot of different jobs in IT. I have built applications and migrated applications from on Microsoft Azure and Amazon Web Services. Although Azure is in my blood, so I've really done a lot more with Azure. I'm a member of an internal Microsoft group, the Azure Advisors Group, which I've been for 3 years. I'm also proud of the fact that I founded the Nashville Microsoft Azure User Group, which currently has over 800 members. Started that 5 years ago with 4 people. And it has doubled in size. And most of my community outreach is here in the Nashville area to the, my group and other groups like the local .NET group, other meetup groups here in Nashville. So I do spend a lot of time presenting to user groups. And I published a few books and white papers, and I blog as Cloudy in Nashville. So that's my blog. I'd like everybody to go visit my blog so we can drive some traffic to it. But I blog mainly about Azure, sometimes about the user group and how to run a user group, but essentially, the real key is the cloud. Okay. And I do, like I say, I do a lot of presenting at conferences and other local events. I was an IBM Microsoft MVP for 3 years, and now I'm a member, obviously, of MVP Reconnect. And by the way, since this is a reasonably small group, if anybody has any questions at any time, feel free to interrupt. This meeting and the recording is just for us internally. Okay, so you can interrupt. Okay, so why Parthenon? Well, I'll explain why we call it Parthenon in a minute, but it is based on the Microsoft hub and spoke network architecture design pattern. And that's a design pattern that has a bunch of interesting characteristics. In fact, I've got some references at the end, to some Microsoft documentation that talks about hub and spoke and why it's a good idea. But essentially, it lets you isolate network traffic. It lets you control traffic between environments that you might have, like development and production and user acceptance test, and also control network traffic to and from your company's internal network. In most cases, companies do have an internal network that they want to connect up to Azure. So it also allows you to limit access from the internet. Again, this won't mean a lot until we actually get into showing you what the architecture looks like. The reason we call it Parthenon is because it is here in Nashville. We actually have a life-size replica of the Greek Parthenon. Of course, this one looks a lot nicer because this one's been reconstructed. The one in Greek is pretty much a wreck. But if you think about it, it's got a base and then it's got columns. And we create environments like development, production, and QA as pillars, as columns of virtual networks, using virtual networks in Azure. So our version of the Parthenon looks kind of like this. There's a transit network at the base, or the hub, if you're thinking hub and spoke. And then there are environments for each of the environments like development, QA, and production, right? And we create virtual networks, and we do things that I should point out up front that this is a single subscription architecture. So in a single Azure subscription, we create multiple virtual networks that describe, that contain the resources for each environment. And the other thing I wanted to point out, and again, this is an example of a naming convention that we use. I have to emphasize that naming conventions in Azure are extremely important. You're going to start creating things in Azure, and you're going to create a lot of resources, and you're going to basically be flooded with all kinds of names in the portal or in PowerShell, and you need to have some way of managing and controlling what you create and what things refer to. So we've defined a naming convention that we use. The first identifier is the type of resource. In this case, it's resource group. Then 3 letters that would define the company or the division of a company or department, but again, some organizational structure. And then that's followed by the word storage in the case of storage accounts, and then dev, QA, user acceptance testing, production, and so forth. Common resources go in the core infrastructure resource group, and application-specific resources go in each environment. And you notice that we have application sub-resource groups within each environment. Again, we'll show you a real example of this, and I think it'll make a lot more sense. So this is what our network design looks like. We have virtual networks for each environment, like development, QA, user acceptance testing, production. Within the virtual network, you can break up a virtual network into subnets. So, for instance, if you think about the classical 3-tier architecture like web, application, and data, we would put those in subnets. There's a few additional subnets here worth mentioning. There's a DMZ, or demilitarized zone subnet, in each environment in case you want to put things like firewalls and build demilitarized zones, network demilitarized zones in each subnet or in a subnet. Again, you might only do that in the production subnet, but we actually create the structure for you. Okay? And there's also subnets for platform as a service resources as well as infrastructure as a service resources. If you look at these virtual networks are actually created and all paired together so that there can be communications between them on a controlled basis. And the things at the top that you see are actually network security groups. Think of those like little mini firewalls that can be used to control the traffic into and out of each virtual network. So given that you have network security groups that you can actually put over a virtual network, you can actually control traffic between them. So for instance, if you don't want traffic between development and production, you can prevent that traffic from actually occurring. The base of the Parthenon, or the hub of the hub and spoke architecture, is the transit layer. And in the transit network, what we have is we actually have all the stuff that has to communicate with the outside world. Mainly that is gateways. And Azure actually supports 2 different kinds of virtual network gateways. There's the kind of virtual network gateway that's a VPN connection to your corporate network. There's also an express route gateway, if you're fortunate enough to have an express route circuit. For those of you who don't know, an express route circuit is an extremely high-speed pipe between Azure and an external location. And when I say high speed, I've measured 3 to 5 millisecond latency between an application running in Azure over an express route gateway to a corporate network. I defy anybody to get that kind of latency over the open internet. So again, the network design is a single subscription design. It's based on virtual networks and subnets, network security groups, network interface cards, which are attached to virtual machines in Azure, and virtual network gateways. All right. You might put other stuff in that core infrastructure like remote access servers and so forth. Or if you have an Active Directory environment on premises and you want to put an Active Directory domain controller in Azure as a replica, you might put it in that network. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to actually take a look at what this all results in. And you can see we're going to show you a demo script that will actually build the environments. And the options you have are pretty straightforward. You build, in addition to that transit or subnetwork, we can create development, quality assurance, user acceptance testing, integration testing, system testing, and production environments. Also, in many cases, we have to create a PCI environment for a customer, or in the healthcare industry, a HIPAA environment. And last but by no means least, we can also create a disaster recovery environment, which is actually created in a different region. So this is what we're going to do. But before I walk you through some of this and show you how we actually do it, are there any questions at this point? I see a question about the slides. We will post the slides, right, Susie? I think we will post the slides in the
with the recording, or if you want, we can actually upload the file if you want to send it to me, or you can upload it in the events group as well.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that after the meeting.
Okay.
Because I know we're going to do this again later today, right? So.
Yep. Okay,
so let's get out of slides. Slides are fun, but I'm always accused of using too many slides. And let's actually take a look at, and again, this is an actual build engine that we have built that we use to build the Parthenon, a particular Parthenon. Okay, and it's got a PowerShell script. It's got a main PowerShell script. It's got an execution command line, a main PowerShell script, and then it's got a bunch of JSON templates. And the JSON templates define detail parameters for building all these environments, plus the JSON to control storage accounts, virtual networks, and virtual network gateways. And what I want to do is just basically, and again, I know not everybody's a PowerShell guru. I tried to make this as as commented as possible, well commented as possible. I use Visual Studio Code here as my PowerShell editor. There's lots of different PowerShell editors. The regular PowerShell command line, the PowerShell ISE. I like code for pretty much everything because it can also be used to test PowerShell scripts. So this is the build execution script for company WZ1. Why WZ1? Because my initials are William. My name is William Zach. So for a demo I use WZ. So there's a company ID, and again we're setting a lot of parameters, and we'll see when we get to the last line of this script how this is all actually used. Setting a location, that's just because I occasionally will try to run the script from the wrong directory, so that's just to protect me against myself. Creating a console transcript file, so everything this build script does will actually be recorded for posterity, so you can look at it. Also, this is an important parameter too, because what we do as a result of running the build is we actually generate the ARM templates that can be used to reconstruct the infrastructure. And we do that in a temporary directory so that should you decide to make changes, you actually have all the templates that you can use afterwards to do it. That's followed by my tenant and subscription ID and my login credentials. And we use the service principal method rather than interactive login. there's two ways to log into Azure. You can actually get a dialog box prompt up and enter your credentials, or you can do it programmatically. And just to make this process as automatic as possible, we do it programmatically. There's just some temporary variables for paths to get to the various components of the process. The parameters file, which we're going to look at in a minute, and then the JSON templates for building virtual network storage accounts and virtual network gateways. I want to focus on the execute the build down at the bottom. You can see that it's running the main PowerShell script, specifying all the parameters that we set up above for the tenant, the subscription, passwords. Build it in East US 2, so that location says where to build all these environments. Just the paths to each of those, JSON templates for building each component of the architecture. I'm also going to build a disaster recovery location in West US and do that automatically. Then the last line specifies what environments you want built. So for instance, there's transit, development, production, and DR in this case. Again, like you saw, there's a lot more we could be building. Connect all basically just says, okay, now that you've built all these virtual networks by environment, let's peer them all together. And then finally build the virtual network gateways and create the output in the output path. So that's that. The other file, and again, it is a little busy, but the other file I wanted to show you is the parameters file. Okay. Now we are in the process of turning the parameters file into a forms-driven application. So a lot of the PowerShell will be hidden. And by the way, we don't actually market this as an application, although we've talked about it. We mostly use it, to help our customers and clients. So this is the parameters file. Again, you see the company ID. There's more information. For those of you who are not network mavens, CIDR is classless interdomain routing. It's a way of defining groups of IP addresses, both internally in Azure and and in the cloud and in your corporate network. And again, I won't go into detail except that the slash at the end defines how many addresses that you have available. For instance, the slash is really actually that number at the end, the slash 16, really says how much of the 32-bit IP address is actually the network part versus the host or client part. So for instance, slash 16 would give you 65,000 possible addresses, whereas a slash 27, for instance, would give you only 32. So based upon how much you think you're going to put in each virtual network, that's how you would pick that address. And then there's the information about each of, detailed information about each of the environments. Again, I won't bore you by trying to walk you through all of this. Like I said, we are in the process. Notice that we have a lot of things undefined here because we didn't ask for those environments to be generated. Okay? So let's take a look at the result at what we get. Again, like I say, I am not going to bore you by making you sit through the 45 minutes to an hour creation of the gateways as part of this process, but I do want to show you what happens when we run this process. Let's see, I want to do it this way. Okay? And essentially, we generate a transcript file, which you saw me creating in the PowerShell script, and then all the JSON templates for creating all of these environments for production, development, storage, as well as the transit network, so that if you do decide that you want to create it later, you can actually go through and put this into your wrap your own logic around this and use this to create it. And again, I don't want to bore you too much with this. I do want to show you the transcript, because I think that's important. Okay, wrong one. Let's go into here. Okay. And I'll open that in code as well because it does a nice job of color coding. Otherwise, it's just a flat notepad type file. So this is the transcript file, which shows you that it creates everything. And everything is detailed out here in terms of everything that's being used, everything that's being created, all the way down to, details of the parameters that are entered. Again, I wanted to make sure, when I ran this, that there was plenty of output generated. Okay? When we get down to creating the virtual network gateways, at the end, what you see is you actually see the writing of all those JSON files, all those JSON templates. Okay? Okay, so that's enough of that. What I think I'd like to do at this point is actually show you the result of all this process. Okay? And the result of this process, again, I have lots of subscriptions, access to a lot of subscriptions. Like I say, we do manage services for some of our customers. But this is the Azure portal. And for those of you who work with Azure, you know this really well. For those of you who don't, a little explanation is probably in order. This is a customizable portal. This little edit button up here will actually let you drag and drop components that you want to put on your dashboard. When you create resources, you can also pin them to the dashboard. But for those of you who've worked with SharePoint, it's kind of like a SharePoint web parts type of thing. And again, we've been talking a lot about virtual networks, and we've been talking a lot about resource groups. You can see what we created in terms of resource groups is we created all those resource groups that were shown in the diagram for the transit network, the production network, development network, again, core infrastructure, only creating the environments that we needed. If we look at the virtual networks, okay, we can see that these are the virtual networks that we created. And again, these correspond to the environments plus the transit network. So if we look at production, again, we'll just focus in on production. You can see that there's a lot of information up here, and you can see where, now that we've talked about the two builds, the execution script and the build script, there we've got the business unit, we've got a support tier. By the way, we include support tier because of our managed services business. So we actually have gold, silver, platinum, and so forth, based on different service levels that we offer as part of our support process. But again, we're creating production. This is the resource group that this network is in, my subscription, the address space that we specified in that parameter file, and also where we're getting our DNS information. What I want to focus in on are subnets. And again, we talked about subnets within the environment. We've got our traditional web, application, and data tiers, as well as core infrastructure for this particular environment, and a demilitarized zone in case we want to do something like put a firewall into the architecture. We've also got, in each case, although we might not use it except in the transit network, we create a gateway subnet so that you can have a virtual network gateway to things outside of Azure. Okay? So we've got this. We've got network security groups. Again, we can open up a network security group, I think. Let's see if we can get it this way. Otherwise, I'll have to go in by a different method. Let's see. Okay, here we go. So if we look at the prod web, oops, that's dev. I didn't want to do dev. Let's go back one. Okay, go back one. Let's see, we're in here. We're looking at the subnets. We're looking at the prod web. Okay, this will take us into the subnets. There's also another path, prod web. Okay, these are all the network security groups. So here's prod web down at the bottom. Remember what I said earlier about the network security group being a little, whoops, let's do it the other way. Sometimes the portal gets you in strange directions. So what I want to do, I want to look at prod web. And I want to show you the detail of the network security group. So this is what a network security group looks like. If you've ever done anything with firewalls, you can tell that this is basically rules for inbound and outbound traffic. Okay, so if you look at this, the ones that start with 6500 are automatically generated rules for inbound security traffic. Things that start with 100 are things that we generate for controlling communications between the virtual networks and between the corporate network. So the top two are actually related to letting VNets communicate with each other unless we decide to block their communication through through networks, through additional network security rules, and also communication with the corporate network. Remember when we showed you? Okay, let me get rid of that screen. We're actually having trouble with Slack this morning. Remember we showed you that there was different CIDR blocks, different network address ranges specified. In this case, what we're doing is we're allowing communications between virtual networks for control traffic, and we've used 172.180.0.0 range for the internal network, and 10.123.0.0 is the actual corporate network address range. So basically, the 200 says allow traffic between all the virtual networks. Again, we can block traffic, between specific virtual networks. I think this really illustrates that if you're not careful, you can actually paint yourself into a corner. Hold on. I don't know how to shut off all these messages. I apologize. Outbound security rules, again, are just, the default ones that are generated. The most important things to note are the very last rule in each set, which is a deny rule. So basically what that says is anything that doesn't match one of those rules up above is actually forbidden or denied, okay? So we got to have a deny all at the end. Okay, so let's see, what else can I show you? Show you the storage accounts. And again, you remember that diagram that we had where we showed storage accounts. This is another example of why naming conventions are really important. And again, I've been through a lot of naming convention wars in my time with Azure. It's important to have a naming convention, whether you follow our convention or whether you have another convention or not. For instance, it's still important. For instance, in one case, we have a client that wanted region in their naming convention, so region identifier, because they had things in multiple regions that they wanted to keep track of. But you can actually, use filters to filter down. But it's, like I say, naming conventions make it a lot easier to understand things. Again, creating a new resource here is just as simple as clicking on Create Resource. Again, I won't create it because it's not part of the demo, but we can actually create a Windows server. We can actually create lots of different things. Again, I'm not gonna bore you with it and drag you through all of it. Let's see what else. Okay. I know I've gone on and on quite a bit. Let me go back to the slides because there's a couple of things I want to leave you with. Let's see, where are we? We will come back. Okay, so what we talked about, I think you saw, again, what you saw is all the result of all the build process, the transit or hub network, all the different environments. And again, we only created a few of these, because the more you create, obviously, the longer it takes. I do want to, and again, this was our storage account design. This slide is a little bit out of place, but the whole point is that we created storage accounts, in resource groups, and we did it by type of storage: operating system drives, data drives, and so forth. Okay, we built it. We built the Parthenon network. We took you through the execution script, the parameters file. We looked at some of the output artifacts. We looked at the generated ARM templates, and then we took you on a walk through the Parthenon network, the subscription, resource groups, virtual networks, the network security groups, and the storage accounts. And it is important to design all of this up front. I mean, I have a blog post. I think I have a reference at the end. I drew a lot of attention because the title of the blog post was, "Is Azure Adoption Too Easy?" And the reason I titled it that way is because it's very easy to jump into Azure and create stuff, and it's very easy to paint yourself into a corner. So you want to be kind of careful. You want to plan out what you're doing with Azure. You don't want to just jump into it. I mean, it's great that Microsoft has made it easy for you to get in to try it, but if you're planning for a production environment, you really need to plan it out. Like I say, we make a lot of money by helping companies undo what they've done and redo it in a better way like this. Some references here. Again, there's a really good Microsoft document on the hub and spoke network topology in Azure, a podcast on building isolated systems, A lot of people don't realize, but if you want to come up to speed on Azure, there's free training from Pluralsight. There's about 10 different courses that you can actually access in Pluralsight for free because Microsoft makes them available at that address. And finally, my blog post is Azure Adoption Too Easy. So that's what I have so far. Again, I haven't had any questions yet, but I think we can open up for questions now. This is my contact information. Again, if you think of questions afterwards, you want to contact, I love to help people adopt Azure. One of my standard jokes is, at home, I open the refrigerator door, the light goes on, so I talk about Azure for 15 minutes. So I hope, let me leave you with that. Bad joke, okay? So are there any questions?